I moved into the house on a Tuesday. Nothing special about that. I had a few boxes, a mattress I'd been meaning to replace for 2 years, and a 6-month lease I'd signed without visiting the property in person. I was between jobs, and my cousin had found the listing and said the price was stupid cheap for the square footage. That should have told me something. The house was a 2-bedroom on a rural stretch outside Millhaven, Georgia. Old farmhouse style, maybe 80 years old. Sitting back off a gravel road with a tree line maybe 40 feet from the back porch. The nearest neighbor was a quarter mile up the road. I didn't mind that. I needed quiet more than I needed company at that point in my life. The first 2 weeks were fine. Better than fine, actually. I slept well. I got into a routine. I didn't think about much except putting myself back together. The first thing I noticed was the chair. I had a wooden chair I kept at the small desk in the second bedroom, which I was using as a home office. One morning I came into work and the chair had been moved back about 3 feet, facing the window instead of the desk. I live alone. I don't sleepwalk. I sat there for a second trying to remember if I had done it. Maybe moved it to look outside or something. I couldn't remember doing it, but I also couldn't rule it out. I turned it back around and got to work. I didn't think much of it at the time. The second thing happened about a week later. I was outside in the evening sometimes, just sitting on the back porch. It had become a habit, maybe 9 or 10 o'clock, cooling down before bed. One night I noticed something at the edge of the tree line, a gap in the brush where someone or something had clearly been standing. The grass was flattened in a rough circle, not a large area, but deliberate looking, like someone had stood there for a while. Could have been a deer, could have been anything. The woods back there were full of whatever wildlife Georgia has in September. I told myself that. But it was the shape of it that bothered me a little. It wasn't a hoofprint kind of shape. It was just a flat, wide, standing-shaped circle of pressed-down grass. I started coming inside before dark after that. The third thing I can't explain away as easily. I was on a work call one afternoon sitting at my desk, and I pulled out my laptop camera to switch to video. In the thumbnail preview before I turned it on, I could see my face, the desk, the wall behind me, and the doorway to the hallway. The door was open maybe halfway, and standing just barely in the frame. Half hidden by the door was a shape, upright, still. I spun around in my chair immediately, and there was nothing there. The hallway was empty. The house was quiet. I watched the video back later. The shape was there in the preview for about 2 seconds. It's blurry, and the lighting is bad, and I genuinely cannot tell you what I was looking at. I've shown it to 2 people and have gotten different reactions. One said it's a shadow from the curtains. The other didn't say anything for a long time, and then changed the subject. I started leaving every light on in the house after that. The fourth thing shook me in a way that's hard to describe. I was cleaning out the closet in the second bedroom, pulling stuff off the high shelf, and I found something pushed all the way in the back. A small glass jar with a handwritten label. Inside were about a dozen small strips of paper, folded tight. I opened it and read a few. They all had dates on them. Dates going back 11 years. Each one written in the same careful small handwriting. Just a date, nothing else. No name, no explanation. The most recent one was from 4 months ago. 4 months ago. The house had been empty for 8 months between tenants. I looked up the rental history afterward just to confirm. It had. I don't know who put those dates in that jar. I don't know what the dates mean. I threw it away and called the property management company, and they told me they'd pass it along to the owner. I never heard anything back. I started checking the locks twice every night after that. The fifth thing is why I left. About a month after I found the jar, I came home from a grocery run to find my back door unlocked. I was almost certain I had locked it, but I wasn't 100% sure. So I walked through the house, checked everything, didn't find anything wrong. I made dinner and tried to put it out of my mind. That night around 2 in the morning I woke up. I don't know why, I just did. I lay there for a few seconds listening. The house was quiet. Then I turned over and looked toward the bedroom door, which I always leave open a few inches, and I saw the light in the hallway was different. Dimmer. like something was standing between me and the hallway light. I didn't move for a long time. I just watched the gap in the door. After maybe 2 minutes, the light shifted back to normal. I heard a very soft sound from the front of the house, a creak, then the faint but distinct sound from the front door being pulled shut. Whoever it was had a key. They had let themselves in, and then they let themselves out, and for some reason, they'd come stand outside my bedroom door. I don't know how many times they'd done that before. I moved out 4 days later. I didn't finish the lease. I still think about the jar with the dates. 11 years of dates, and the house was supposedly vacant for most of them. Someone was coming and going that whole time. I don't know what they were tracking or why. I probably never will. That's the part I can't put down. I was 12 the summer my family rented a cabin near Lake Horrell. Not a resort or anything like that. Just a small cabin my dad found online somewhere in rural Minnesota. There was nothing around for miles except trees, a gravel road, and a gas station about 20 minutes away that doubled as a grocery store. My parents thought it would be good for me to get off screens for a while. I didn't argue much. I was a pretty agreeable kid back then. There was another family staying in the cabin next to ours. They had a daughter around my age named Kara. We got along fast the way kids do when there's nothing else around. By the second day, we were already wandering the tree line together, just looking for things to do. The first time something felt off was on our third morning there. We were sitting on the dock when a man walked along the far edge of the lake. He wasn't doing anything strange, just walking. But he stopped for a second and looked in our direction. Not the quick glance you'd give two kids sitting somewhere. It was longer than that. Still. Then he just kept moving. I didn't say anything to Kara about it. Looking back, I don't know why I didn't. That same afternoon, we found a trail behind the cabins that no one had mentioned to us. It wasn't marked on any of the little tourist maps my dad had picked up at the gas station. It was just a worn dirt path that disappeared into the trees. We didn't go far, maybe 100 meters before Kara said she was hungry, and we turned back. But before we did, I noticed a folding chair sitting between two trees, facing the trail, not facing the lake, not facing any view, just the trail. There was a crushed can of something beside it. I thought maybe it was a hunter spot or something. I didn't mention it to my parents. The next evening, my dad drove to the gas station to grab some things for dinner. My mom was napping. Kara knocked on the door and asked if I wanted to go back on the trail before it got dark. I said okay. We walked further this time, maybe half a mile in. The trees were denser and the light was going flat and gray above us. At some point, Kara grabbed my wrist and stopped walking. I looked at her. She was staring ahead. There was someone standing on the trail. It was a man, or at least I think it was. He was far enough away that I couldn't make out any detail. Just a figure, very still, standing in the middle of the path. I waited for him to move or wave or do literally anything to indicate that he was some hiker. He didn't. He stood there the same way a person stands when they've been standing there for a while, like they're used to waiting. Kara said very quietly, "Do you know him?" I said no. Neither of us ran. We just turned around and walked back, fast, not saying a word. I don't know why we didn't run. I've thought about that a lot. We didn't tell our parents. I still don't fully understand why. I think there's part of me that was afraid of how strange it would sound. There was a man standing in the woods. That's not a sentence that sounds like anything really, until it is. That night I couldn't sleep. I was sharing the pull-out couch with the window that faced the tree line. And around 2 in the morning, I woke up for no reason. I lay there for a minute in that half-consciousness state where anything feels slightly wrong, and you can't tell if it's you or the room. I looked toward the window. There was a shape standing near the tree line, just at the edge of where the dark started. I couldn't tell if it was a person, or a shadow, or something my half-asleep brain was constructing out of nothing. I told myself it was a tree. There were plenty of trees. I pulled the blanket up and stared at the ceiling, and eventually I fell back to sleep. We were supposed to leave on Sunday morning. On Saturday afternoon, both of our families went into town together to eat at the only diner within 30 miles. Kara and I finished eating before our parents and asked if we can walk around outside. They said yes, stay close, don't go far. We walked maybe 2 blocks before Kara spotted a narrow path behind the town's small hardware store that cut through a thin patch of trees toward the lakeshore. She wanted to see if it connected back. I said okay. Looking back, that was my first real mistake. The path was short, barely a quarter mile. We were maybe halfway through when I heard footsteps behind us, not far behind. I turned around and the man from the trail was there. At least I'm almost certain it was him. Same build, same stillness, except now he was moving, and he was close. Maybe 30 feet back, and he wasn't pretending to be a hiker anymore. Kara saw him the same second I did. Neither of us said anything. He started walking faster. I grabbed Kara's hand and we ran. Not the controlled, purposeful kind of running. The kind where your body just goes before your brain decides anything. I could hear him behind us. His footsteps heavier, faster, gaining. Kara was crying without making any sound, just tears. And I remember the sound of my own breathing being so loud, it didn't sound like me. The trees ended, and we broke out onto the lakeside road, and I screamed. I just screamed as loud as I could. A man washing his truck in a driveway maybe 50 feet away looked up. I screamed again and pointed back at the tree line, and he dropped what he was doing and jogged toward us. The footsteps behind us stopped. By the time the man from the driveway reached us, there was nobody on the path. Just trees. Just quiet. He walked us back to the diner himself, his hand on my shoulder the whole way. My dad and Kara's dad went back to look. They found nothing. No one. The local sheriff took a report and used the words like probably a jogger and hard to say, and these trails get a lot of use. We left the same night instead of the next morning. I've been back to Lake Orel once since then, about 2 years later, with a different group. I looked it up before we went, not for any specific reason, just out of habit. In the local community forum, I found a post from around the summer we'd visited, someone asking if anyone else had noticed a man who'd kept appearing near the rental cabins on the east side of the lake. There were a few replies. Most of them were dismissive. One of them just said, "Stay on the marked trails and don't go out after dark." Nobody replied after that. The thread was locked. I never found out who he was or what he wanted. The sheriff's words still sit with me. Probably a jogger. Joggers don't follow 12-year-old girls down empty paths at that kind of pace. Joggers don't disappear the second another adult shows up. I still think about the folding chair in the trees, facing the trail, just waiting. Someone had been watching that path for a while before we ever found it, and I don't think we were the first kids who did. My aunt and uncle have a vacation home about 2 hours outside of Nashville, right on the edge of a small lake. Every July, they'd invite the whole family out for a week. I was 19 that summer, and since most of my cousins were still little kids, my job was basically just to watch them while the adults did adult things. It wasn't glamorous, but I didn't mind. Free food, a lake, and a week away from my part-time job stocking shelves. I'd done it the 2 summers before without anything weird happening. That summer felt normal at first. We got there on a Friday evening, unloaded everything, and my uncle started the grill while the kids ran straight for the water. I remember sitting on the dock watching them and noticed a man standing on the opposite bank. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there with his hands in his pockets, looking in our direction. I didn't think much of it. The lake wasn't private property. People walked the trail all the time. But he was there the next morning too. Same spot, roughly. Same posture. I pointed him out to my aunt. She said it was probably just a local who walked the trail every day. That made sense. I let it go. The second thing happened 2 days in. I was putting the younger kids to bed in the back room when my cousin Lily, who was 6, asked me who the man outside was. I asked her what she meant, and she pointed at the window. By the time I looked, there was nothing there. Just the dark tree line and the motion sensor light on the back porch that hadn't triggered. I told her it was probably just the shadows from the trees and tucked her in. She seemed satisfied with that. I wasn't really, but I didn't have a better explanation. The window was about 4 feet off the ground. Anyone standing close enough for a 6-year-old to notice would have to be right up against the glass. I didn't sleep great that night. The third thing was harder to brush off. On Wednesday, I took the kids on a little nature walk on the trail that looped around the back of the property. About 10 minutes in, Lily stopped and grabbed my hand. She whispered that she saw the man again. I looked where she was pointing, and I saw him too, maybe 30 yards back on the trail, just standing there watching us. I turned the kids around immediately and walked them back to the house fast without making it obvious I was panicking. When I mentioned it to my uncle, he actually went out to look. He came back and said there was nobody there, but he did find something that bothered him. A pile of cigarette butts at the base of the tree just off the trail. A lot of them, like someone had been standing in that spot repeatedly for a while. My uncle called the non-emergency police line that night. They said they'd have a car drive by a few times. That made the adults feel better. It didn't really make me feel better. The fourth thing happened Thursday night, and by this point my nerves were already stretched thin. I was the last one awake, watching something on my laptop in the kitchen table with my headphones in. At some point I looked up and noticed the small window above the sink was open about 3 inches. I hadn't opened it. I didn't know who had. I got up and closed and locked it, and stood there in the kitchen for probably 2 full minutes just listening. The house was quiet. Outside was quiet. I told myself someone had probably opened it for airflow earlier and forgotten. I went to bed with every light in the house on. What happened Friday night is the part I still have trouble talking about. I woke up around 2 in the morning needing water. That was it. Nothing dramatic. I just got up, half asleep, and padded down the hallway toward the kitchen in the dark the way I had every other night that week. I didn't turn a light on because I didn't want to wake anybody up. I was 3 steps into the living room before I realized someone was already in it. He was standing completely still near the far wall, right beside the sliding glass door, which was open about a foot. I don't know how long he'd been in there for. I don't know how he'd gotten through the door without waking anyone. I just know that when my eyes adjusted, he was there, and for one horrible second we were both completely frozen, just staring at each other across the dark room. I took a step back, and that was all the reaction he needed. He closed the distance between us in about 2 seconds, and got one other arm locked around my shoulders from behind and clamped his other hand over my mouth so hard my head snapped back against his chest. That hand was pressing so tight across my lips and nose that I had to fight just to breathe through it. I tried to make a sound anyway, and nothing came out. Not even close. It was just this muffled, useless pressure against the palm that nobody 3 feet away could have heard, let alone my uncle down the hall. He didn't say anything at first. He just held me like that, completely still, waiting to see if I'd keep struggling. Then he put his mouth close to my ear and said very softly, "Stop." I went still. I don't know if it was the voice or the fact that I couldn't breathe properly, or just my brain shutting down from pure shock. But I stopped moving, and he started steering me toward the sliding door, 1 step at a time, his hand still locked over my mouth the whole time. My brain was doing this horrible thing where it was completely clear and completely useless at the same time. I remember my right hand hanging free at my side, swinging slightly with each step, brushing the edge of the couch cushion as he pushed me past it. My fingers dragged across something wedged into the gap between the cushions. The TV remote. I don't know why I grabbed it. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a plan. My hand just closed around it on instinct, the way you grab a railing when you feel yourself slipping. And then without thinking, without deciding to, I jammed my thumb into every button I could find and held them all down at once. The television came on at full volume, some late-night infomercial just detonating into the room loud enough to rattle the windows. His whole body flinched, 1 second, maybe less. The hand over mouth shifted just a fraction, pulling slightly away from my nose as his arm tensed up. I bit down on his palm as hard as I possibly could. He made a short, sharp sound, and his hand came off my face. And I pulled forward out of his grip and sucked in the biggest breath of my life and screamed. Not a word, just a sound, the loudest thing I have ever produced. I felt it tear out my throat and fill the entire house. My uncle's voice came from the bedroom immediately, then his feet on the floor, then more voices, the kids crying, the whole house waking up at once like a switch had been flipped. The man was already at the sliding door. He looked back at me for a moment, and then he was gone into the dark. The police found him in the weeds by the water, about 100 yards by the bank. He had zip ties in his jacket pocket and a folding knife clipped inside his sleeve. They wouldn't tell us much more than that, and my uncle pushed for details over the following days. Eventually, someone let slip that the man had no connection to our family that anyone could identify. He'd apparently been in the area for at least a week. That part bothers me the most, honestly, because if he had no reason to specifically target us, the question is just exactly what he was planning and why he had kept coming back night after night to watch and wait instead of acting sooner. Nobody ever gave me an answer to that. I don't have a version of that night where I feel lucky. I just have the version where a TV remote was sitting in the right place at the right time. And I try not to think too hard about all the versions where it didn't.